to realign, if you want, to redesign, to rethink, I might say to challenge all of the many assumptions that we historically had about what is good and what is bad in higher education. Let me give you one example. We used to say all the time that the best proxy of quality of education is if you are in the rankings. And now we wonder, are the rankings a good proxy of quality? Peter Drucker used to say in 1997, I believe, he said that universities were in crisis, that universities, the way that we were conceiving them, were not suited for the new realities. And people may argue that he was exaggerating. But in summary, he was making the point that we needed to change in education. And this is precisely the big lesson that we are learning from the crisis. It is a unique opportunity. It looks like planets have been aligned in order for all of us to, again, challenge assumptions and to have the bravery, I might say, of rebuilding or building, if you want, of higher education with new principles and with much more ambitious goal towards a society that nobody can predict how it will be, but that everybody will agree that it will be very different to what it has to be.
Indeed. And there's this window of opportunity that we can see right now with those planets aligned that you've spoken about.
That's
but
correct.
The
window is closing. Yeah, because one of the big challenges I see is that for many institutions, unfortunately, there is this attitude of just waiting the thunderstorm to be over, assuming that they will go back to business as usual. And I think they are wrong, honestly. I think they are wrong. So the big question that I have all the time for institutions is, what are you doing? Are you just, watching the movie? Are you in the movie? Are you been acting, proactively, or are just emulating what others are doing? I think it is time to, again, to do things differently. Otherwise, we won't have that chance in the future.
Let's hold that thought about our roles in that movie. And let me bring in Aidid. So still thinking about innovation, accelerating innovation. Aidid, what's your perspective, please?
Yes, thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with Francesco's point of view earlier. I think certainly, even before we had the current pandemic crisis, universities, certainly in Malaysia, and I would assume in general science and technology and engineering universities as a whole, were facing issues with perhaps what is perceived as the declining interest in student enrollment towards such technical areas. Certainly, that coupled with the fact that now we are unable to do a lot of face-to-face interaction, laboratory experiments, engineering-based projects, which require a lot of close contact interaction, has certainly made the situation for such universities as like UTP a greater challenge. The other challenge that we are having right now is that even where we have a pool of students who are interested in coming to university, they will have financial constraints, financial issues in terms of being able to afford the tuition in private engineering universities. And of course, they will have other priorities in their lives currently, such as perhaps getting a job immediately or working and supporting the family and so forth. So where this crisis has now accelerated a lot of universities like UTP, for example, is how do we deliver our engineering programs still in a very relevant and interesting way to the younger generation of students, and also being able to keep the cost to serve at a low price point in order to ensure that we can continue to allow access to such our university without the burdens of a financial constraint. So I think that's one of the issues that we're doing. So there's been a lot of thought in terms of what we can deliver online virtually, what sort of experiments can we do more efficiently that would cut down, that would still allow the same amount of engineering knowledge to be passed on without the necessary expense that's associated with in the past. So I would say those are the few things: having access to technical engineering and also keeping the cost of delivering such programs at a competitive price.
Wow. Okay. A whole host of challenges. We need to diversify resourcing. We need to get on that front foot to be ahead of the game so that we can thrive. I'm going to shift now to thinking about solidarity and the experience for our learners, in fact, in 2020. It's been quite distinct. We've got a poll just to lead us into our next question. This second poll, if Simone can put up the poll, we're asking you to essentially vote yes or no. So here's the question. Has learning become more or less of a social experience this year? Please cast your votes. And I imagine we can see some results very quickly. Ooh, very close. Very close, but less seems to be winning. Okay, Paulo, what would you say to that, please?
I would say that I understand, because if we bring the traditional class experience to an online environment, it's less social. And it proves that we need to change methodology completely. It can be more social, and we can learn much more. Everybody can learn more, both professors and also the students, but the methodology has changed, and that is the challenge.
Okay. Hyoshin, I think you've got something to say about that too. Audio. Hyoshin, would you like to say something about that?
Okay, so everybody experienced COVID-19, but I mean, my experience would be slightly different from the result of the poll. And actually, I believe that, we learned social problems cannot be solved alone. Still, in reality, there is not enough experience to solve the problems through solidarity, and preparations are not sufficient. In this respect, the necessity of learning and training as a collaborative and problem-solving process has become more urgent, I think. So if so, it is difficult to say that this has been appropriately done, particularly in higher education. So currently, our learners experience group learning or team assignments through Zoom online, but it is still low. I mean, in my own context. So in the post-COVID-19, teaching and learning to develop collaborative and problem-solving skills in a hybrid environment, whether online or offline, and I think it should be conducted.
Yeah, very valid points, Hyoshin, absolutely. And if we remember, we go back to the World Education Forum, their report for work, they talk about some of the elements you've talked there, the 4 C's, collaboration, communication, creativity, critical thinking. We need to be doing that too. Okay, all right. Let's move on to our third general question, and then we'll go into the community Q&A. So here, what are the benefits of digital technologies? And really, there are some benefits. How do we distribute them equitably or fairly across demographies? I'm going to ask Francisco and Paulo to comment on this one above all. Francisco, what would you say about the benefits of digital technologies and how can we distribute these fairly?
Well, probably what it might be interesting is to start by saying, how acute is the problem? And in higher education, that is a significant challenge. Out of the 200 million students in higher education in the world that were out of school, suddenly, in a totally unexpected case, we know that about only 60% of them were able to have some kind of continuation of education with some level of digital technology. in some cases, WhatsApp, Skype, in other cases, sophisticated, digital devices, et cetera, et cetera. But now we are talking about 40% of students in the world who have been unable to continue their education. They already face a significant deficit of learning, which it will be just naive to think that it will be erased, because that is not the case. And of course, if you go deeper, you see that the digital divide in higher education is very acute in some sectors. Of course, some countries, as you can imagine, countries in which the internet penetration is relatively low, go to African countries, a number of Latin American countries, but even in highly developed societies, even in the United States, you know that there are a number of students that are unable to continue their education because they don't have either connectivity or a computer. In countries like Mexico, for instance, in high school, if you are a student that is in a school of relatively limited resources, which means that you don't have resources, that eventually will represent that only about 30% of students have a computer at home, which means that 70% don't. So, and if you do the rural versus urban, you will find even a deeper digital divide. So I think it is important to recognize that we have a problem to begin with. And of course, then we talk about the solutions. And for sure, technology is an amazing enabler of massification, if you want, of information and of knowledge, but it's not as easy as we can imagine. And I'm sure that Paulo can elaborate on that because he's the expert on that. But I will always make the case that in this dramatic transition that we faced, we moved from the classroom to Zoom, and that doesn't mean necessarily that it has been the best experience. We have been able to resolve some of the problems, but it's not the panacea. It is not the permanent solution, because otherwise, again, we are going to be getting, as Cosley says in a kind of sarcastic way, the teaching in the classroom is the best way to teach, but is the worst way to learn. And that has been translated right now into the computers. So it is a matter of pedagogy, digital pedagogy. It's not just translating the traditional teaching component. But again, I'm sure that Paulo can elaborate more on that.
I always agree with you, Francisco. So I can only elaborate
so far
regarding the methodology. Moving to Zoom is not or Teams or any other. It's not the answer, because it's a poor way of learning. So we have to change this in a way that we will be able first to activate social learning through technologies, most probably using smaller and cheaper devices where people are interconnected all day long if need be, in real time. It creates a sense of cohesiveness and proximity that we can even have more than in the classroom. But more than that, it also allows, so we have this social aspect, but it also allows professors and lecturers to connect directly on one-to-one more with each student. And students can have an individual follow-up that we could not do before, because it's easier, because it's possible, because it makes sense. And so by changing the methodology this way and reducing tremendously the broadcast that we need to do in the classroom or through Zoom, we are able to, at the same time, increase social learning and have more one-to-one relationship. And these two are the main drivers of learning. So this is also an emotional issue, because no one learns because they are obliged to. We don't want people to learn things by heart. We want to motivate them. We want to create aptitudes. We want to give them tools. And that's something that has to be managed at an emotional level. And in the classroom, we do it. We know how to do it, but it's quite poor when compared to these incredible tools that you have at our hand, these digital technologies that are not just this Zoom thing, that by creating this social environment where people feel emotions, feel friendship, there are challenges, and they overcome those challenges, and they are help to do it. So by focusing on that, we focus on emotion, we focus on learning, and it works. And from my experience, it works much better than before. From my experience, my students learn more, learn faster, and are happier learning, and learn more capabilities than learning by heart. It's a different methodology. It doesn't work overnight, and we have many issues to make this work, and we can discuss them. But if we focus on that, what I can say from my experience is that it is possible and it can be wonderful.
No, it's Maria, I can add a little bit on what Pablo said that briefly, that of course, Pablo is not old, he's young, but you find the case of many old faculty members who were highly resistant to use technology. And one of the things that we have learned during this crisis, that many of them truly embraced technology in a very proactive way, which is one of the interesting lessons that we are learning about it. But also the other interesting thing is that many students, the expectation was that they were going to be highly excited because they will not go to school, they would stay at home, and that they would be able to connect in, and learning using the technology that they use to have fun. And of course, we have seen, there was a very interesting study conducted at the University of Querétaro in Mexico with students, and only 2 out of 10 students had a positive opinion or sentiment about the use of technology the way it is being used. 8 out of 10 had negative opinions: stress, overburden, boring, all those negative things about the use of technology. So those are good signals of what Paulo is making a point about.
Absolutely. Thank you for underlining that, Francisco. And Paulo, thank you for starting to explain to us exactly what you've been doing. And we'll hear more about this as we go through. So in summary, in this first section, essentially, we understand that the pandemic is a social and economic problem, not just a health problem for all of us. There are many layers to this, many layers to what we need to do in our universities, of course. We need to be mindful of what we want to achieve, and then turn to the tools, the digital tools that might help us and enable the changes that we are dealing with. The digital divide is real. There are very big figures behind that. And it has to be dealt with. And we need support from industry, for example, government. And then the point about faculty embracing digital, absolutely. But now in the UK, they're talking about serious cases of burnout amongst faculty. So this is something where we're going to have to prioritize well-being as well, if we're going to really have the energy to see this through and make these changes and have the motivating attitude that you've described. So absolutely. Let's keep this moving, and we're going now into the community Q&A section. What we've done is we've grouped the questions into 3 areas, overarching areas. And of course, there are questions starting to come through as well in the chat. So we'll try and weave those in as we can. So our first theme is actually about community building. So this develops actually from the discussion that Paulo and Francisco have just been having, I think. If we look at the first slide from Simone, we'll have the slide flash up on the screen. That slide gives you a few questions that we already had on community building and safe spaces. So if we can have slide, that's my page 3 slide, Simone. Aha. Oh, yeah, let's go to slide. Next one. That's it. No, back, just back one. A. Perfect. Thank you. All right. This is just to provide the guardrails for our discussion now. So for the next several minutes, we're going to talk about community building. And there's that word, safe spaces. And I think I'm going to go back to Paulo to pick up the discussion on this. And then, of course, Aidid and Hyoshin will contribute too, I believe. So, Paulo, can you start us off about what have you been doing, for example, or how do you see community building in this new remote working, please? And we can lose the slide. Thank you, Simone.
I see that younger people are have less difficulties in creating community using technology than older people on average. So it's normal that the professor will have more difficulties in doing it than younger people. So the professor should probably learn from them, because everybody's learning, the professor as well. It's a new environment, and students have to learn what it means to learn in the new model, and professors as well. And that is a major difficulty. So I believe that this experience should be shared, and that professors should also learn from one another, which is not easy. I don't have to explain why, but it's because normally each one of us has its own view on what, but we really have to share, and we have to discuss, and we have to experiment. And that's the only way to do it. We have to experiment and be open. As professors, we have to learn and hear students all the time and could connect with them. And it's not once per week or twice per week. It's a constant connection because it's possible, just because it's possible. And people feel free. Sometimes I receive messages at midnight and I answer, and we are connected. So this new social environment that is really changing the world, and we know it. It changed elections, it changed countries, it's changing so many things. Also with misinformation, it's true, it's also dangerous, but at the same time, it has a lot of power. So once again, we have to learn from one another, experiment, and advance with something in mind that is always learning capabilities and emotions on my, that's what guides me. It's not really technology. It's what kind of emotions do I want to drive? What kind of context, connecting people I want to drive, and how to make it happen. And sometimes students help me doing it. Like sometimes I ask a couple or ask them all how to do it, and they find the answer. And these experiments allow us to continue. There is no one size fits all solution, but it's more like an attitude, and it's fulfilling. So that's what I can share.
That's it, absolutely. So it's a positive attitude. It's an attitude where you face challenges as opportunities for learning, absolutely. And that we don't get driven by the tools, we drive the tools, absolutely. Hyoshin, what would you say about this theme of the social processes and with learning?
Adding some comments to Paulo's talk about the change and the things that we needed to do to support our students and professors who are working in the higher education. And I'd like to talk about the education, the main aim of the education. So, I mean, talking about my context in Korea, so we are very familiar with the concept of education with the correct answers and knowledge. So it's kind of a knowledge transfer, but it must be shifted to education that fosters the ability to process, converge, and create knowledge. So to do this, and I think education to develop 6 C's that I mentioned before. So rather than 4 C's, so including citizenship, critical thinking, collaboration, and creativity, which you are very familiar. But I'd like to add 2 C's. One is computational thinking. So Paula and Francisco talked about the digital literacy in this era, and so I'd like to add computational thinking and convergence. So those 2 C competencies should be added. And higher education, for example, higher education in Korea requires, I think, an overall transformation of a higher education. And I think it is necessary to establish a linkage system so that for example, in higher education context, the liberal arts education can be converted to primary basic education that fosters 6 C's and applied through major education. So I think the immediate task to be solved urgently is to change the teaching method and the curriculum through changes in the perceptions and attitudes. You mentioned attitudes of, I would say, professors or lecturers or educators. So a new field of systematic training for higher education professors or lecturers must be pioneered to this end. That's what I want to share.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you, Hyoshin. So there's a lot to do there. And I wonder, Aidit, do you want to add something from your perspective on the community building?
Yes, thank you. I would like to echo what Paolo and Hyoshin mentioned earlier on with respect to giving support to our educators and lecturers. What we've noticed, at least within our university management here in Petronas, are two things. Number one, it is very clear that the younger generation of students are very comfortable with the online space. They feel very safe in the online space. They're able to interact on the online space with few hindrance. Now, before we had this crisis, in fact, we were embarking a great deal towards the methodology of flipped classroom and basically online learning. And of course, it was a bit of a challenge to perhaps move a lot of our educational material into the flipped classroom environment where the learning is done in your own time at home, and really in the classroom it's focused towards problem solving and actually interaction. So, but what we found was that when the medical crisis occurred, when the pandemic crisis occurred, and everything had to move online, what we were pleasantly surprised was that a lot of the lecturers actually went above and beyond to try and bring all of their lecture materials online, to the point whereby our systems actually had trouble coping because the lecturers were attempting to bring such detailed amount of visualization towards the experiments that they would normally demonstrate to a student in the class. So certainly a lot of our lecturers and educators were working at late hours and were trying to still deliver the same quality of instruction to their students, and facing a lot of stress and emotional tax towards them when they felt that they were not able. That's one thing I would say that we have to give more support to our educators, given their strive to try and go above and beyond the call of duty to deliver their materials. So that's what I would say. The other thing that, of course, we found challenging is if the student and the lecturer or the educator have had a prior face-to-face interaction, whereby it's, say, a second year, third year, or a fourth year student, there's less of an issue. But where the case where they were an incoming freshman, a first year student, or in our case, what we call foundation, A-levels is done in the university itself. Then fortunately, we were allowed by the government during the brief break between the pandemics to allow to bring students on campus. And we found that was a good way to at least let the students meet the lecturers, even if we didn't have face-to-face interaction. So it was a lot easier in terms of breaking down those social barriers that we had.
Okay, Aidit, thank you. And I noticed we've had some questions relating exactly to the teaching and learning that you've all been touching on here and what's going on. I don't know if any of you want to pick up on the questions that you can see there. Paolo, I can see you're smiling. Is that, if you want to put the sound on?
I can talk forever on any of these aspects.
Okay, 1 minute. Over to you.
We have a major challenge, and we were talking about safe, and something I wanted to share is the following. Safe is important. Why? Because the new needs for learning, both for professors and students, entails failure. Without failure, we don't learn new skills. It's a question more of skills and capabilities than learning things by heart. So we need the safe, and we need to focus on the process. We don't focus on the outcome. So what I do with my students is I don't really care about the final grade. If they try, even if they fail, they win. And because if they continue trying, eventually they will get it right. But this process has to be safe, and social helps, because no one feels safe alone. And using technology to create this safe environment where people try things out first socially, I always start with that. Only then I let them try out individually, but they will do it on a one-to-one basis so they don't get ashamed with everybody else. And when they are correct and they win, then it's shared, so it becomes positive. So these are details, but these details are, for me, the most important details dealing with when creating any methodology for learning. What are the capabilities? What is the safe environment? What are the challenges? How to deal with them? How to use the social environment to create a safe space? How to create pressure so that there is some winning anxiety to really get there? How to do it then individually? This is the process. And that's what I wanted to share, because this safe issue is absolutely crucial. Otherwise, no tacit learning will ever be possible.
Mm-hmm.
There is something that I like to add, Maria, and it's also related to one of the questions from Mr. Ahmed Tajuddin Ali. Because, you know, I agree with what he's making the point about it. We are living in the largest social experiment of our times. And this social experiment is, again, giving us the unique opportunity that we never had before, and probably we will never in the future, to learn as much and as fast as we can on what works and what doesn't work in the traditional academic setting. For instance, you know, is the time to teach 1 hour or 55 minutes the right one? I have seen a lot of literature now saying that the time should be no more than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, it's evaluation, you know, the whole assessment stuff, you know, are we really assessing, you know, capacity of students to memorize or to analyze and to really create knowledge? Can we go back and use the Socratic method again in order to make of education really a meaningful experience for students? You know, in which way teachers used to evaluate by just ordering the number of the ones who pass and the ones who don't. You know, we teach students in a traditional setting to work individually, but now the reality is telling us that they need to work collaboratively. Again, I think there is a unique opportunity to learn about it, to experiment, to observe what happens, to measure, and of course, based on that, to improve education in the future. And unfortunately, I might say, not everybody's taking that opportunity. You know, for many of the institutions and teachers, etc., it's like just coping with that and let's move on and let's see what happens tomorrow. So I hope that more effort can be done on that regard.
For sure, absolutely. I think the challenges are, as mentioned earlier, the fact that with all the best will in the world, there are only so many hours in the day. You might have 24/7 connection, but we don't have 24/7 batteries in us. So we definitely need to refresh to be able to see beyond the current pandemic and see and look to the future. I think that's something that IDEED does very well, because obviously coming from oil and gas, their horizon scanning is for 50 years. So whilst we might be here thinking, oh my goodness, what have these past 10 months been like? What are the next 6 months going to be? And maybe you feel like you're a bit of a hamster wheel. This is why we're doing this event, of course, to try and lift our heads up above and try and look a bit further afield. So yeah, definitely. IDEED, I don't know if you want to say anything there, or I move on to the third topic. I'm going to skip the second.
Sure. Well, okay. On the point being of this being the great social experiment, certainly, I would agree it's a great social experiment. In terms of the long-term outlook of, say, our university or oil and gas in general, I think you are right. Scenario planning was a methodology popularized by Shell, and the oil and gas companies usually use scenario planning to plan 20, 30, or 50 years ahead. I would say in general, the belief, at least within the university, is that we will go back to a great extent to the traditional way of delivering engineering, science, and technology, where everyone is on campus to do experiments. And we are still proceeding with investments for on-campus accommodation to ensure that the social interaction and campus life returns. Now, whether that's the model for every university, I'm not sure. But certainly, I would say for universities that are engineering or science and technology based, and niche universities where we have a specific small target market, I think we will go back to the traditional way of doing things. But certainly, the way we deliver science, technology, and engineering will have to change in terms of making it more interesting to the new generation of students. I mean, if you're learning thermodynamics, and you learned it 20 years ago, where you just learned the first law and yet memorize it, and how it is today, where you have to use all kinds of interactive tools to demonstrate it in an exciting way to a student. I think that's where the challenge will come in for us.
And I think that requires empower the students, make them the real players of their own learning. If this idea that we are the ones who know, they are the ones who don't, is totally wrong now.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. You're right.
Mm-hmm. That's it. The identities, our identities, teacher, learner, professor, student, the hierarchies, it's being laid flat. This brings us to the operating picture. If Simone, can we have the last slide? So slide 5 in my deck, the common operating picture. That way we can pick up the themes we've just been touching on there. Yes, that's the one. Okay, perfect, thank you. These are some questions we had to guide our discussion about the common operating picture. There we are. New models, uncertainty. How do we prepare? What are the attitudes that we can help impart in the students? Lifelong learning is in there. And how do we get out of the crisis? How do we keep our partnerships alive and present through this to get through? Thank you, Simone. Let's lose the slide. So, okay, Francisco, let's bring you back in. What's your advice here? What do you see?
I think
vision?
The advice is that if we are as confused as we are, that means that we are on the right track. There are no easy solutions for sure. The reality is complex. Consequently, the solutions are complex. So we cannot come with easy fixes to this type of things. But, again, there are many things that are happening right now. I'm very, very, fortunate to be observing many of those things all over the world constantly, because the kind of things that I do, and also the kind invitations that I receive to participate in events like this, in which I listen to perspectives from others. And I see very unique and interesting things. For instance, something that is happening that didn't happen before, and that relates to the question that Roberto had here, is that there is increased collaboration among higher education institutions, and also between higher education institutions and relatively unusual partners. And this is great. This is something that we didn't see before. Now it is happening, both at the national as well as the international level. For instance, we are learning that those who think that internationalization is about mobility of students, and Maria knows that very well. Of course, if we don't have students that are traveling, that means that our business is gone. No, we need to reinvent. And reinvention means putting together more strategies for internationalization at home, which allow the majority of students to benefit from that, rather than the tiny number of students that go abroad. A number of things such as, shadow teaching, concentration of curriculum, modular teaching, even bubbles of learning. There are many things happening right now, which is, again, a result of this crisis. People are having to reinvent things in order to survive. And that's wonderful. That's where I see the positive side of this. Now, of course, it is not easy. And Peter Smith was asking a question about it. When we are going to see that change. Institutions don't change as easy. It is correct. Higher education institutions, is paradoxical that higher education institutions are the best place for, mobility of our societies and for experimentation in our societies. If somebody knows how to do experimentation, are faculty members, nobody else. So we have the best tools to do that. However, at the same time, higher education institutions in general, in normal times, are highly resistant to change. Many times because accreditation, because prestige, tradition, publish or perish, you name it. We can list thousands of reasons why change, it is argued that is not possible to happen. Now the reality is telling us that that is not the case anymore.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I love that paradox of universities being so slow. We've existed for 1,000 years. If it's not broken, well, look how much we've moved in 2020. So that's the positive. We're on that path. And again, our identities are evolving. and we need to be upskilling. Absolutely. Paulo, what would you say? How would you add to this? Sound, Paulo, audio.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So we have been talking about technology, and it's true that we've seen this year is that at least the pandemic obliged everybody to experiment. That was wonderful, because it's like low risk, we have to. And it's great because we always learn from it. And also it may start the trend of why not continue to experiment, even if it's over, and we hope it will, because we learn that it makes sense. And at the same time, technology. So there is a tendency saying maybe MOOCs will be the solution and everybody will be technological. And I'm saying exactly the opposite. The importance of the human element, the professor, the human relationship, even through technology, this human relationship is even more important today than before because of this social connection and all that already said. Which means that the place of the professor and the place of the universities with people, with actual people, only through technology is even more important than before. And that's something that should be on our minds, because if we think that technology will be the solution, it never was in any situation. That was my never was. It's the solution comes with people, with technology as a tool. So let's use it, and let's use it with this human and emotional side, with all things that's from it's the main message that I want to convey, thinking about emotions and social and all these things, because technology helps.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow. I think it's time for our final poll before we go into our final comments. The final poll brings in quite a number of the elements we've just been talking about. Thank you, Simone. And also you have the option of actually typing into the chat box any element that you don't see there. So what is crucial to our higher education systems thriving post-pandemic? You can select one, you can select two, you can type something else, type out in the chat box, please. What do you think we need to be focusing on to thrive? And I'll give you a few more seconds to vote. And if we can start to see some of the results. Simone, are there results? Thank you. Ooh, there's a clear winner. Wow. All right. So the student experience above all, and staff training and development, as well as digitalization. And there's something else we need to look in the box. Okay. Okay. Ooh, wow. Any comments on that from our panel?
I think that confirms that, technology is just a tool. It's just a means. It's not the goal. The goal is that we shouldn't forget is that we are preparing the next generation of people that are going to deal with this mess that we are inheriting to them.
Absolutely. And we have the question from Bill Bates, I notice as well, just checking in about this disruption that we've been experiencing in universities. Do we think the government understands, and/or industry? Do they understand what we've been going through? I mean, I don't know if IDEED has an insight, obviously bridging the gap between Petronas and the university. IDEED, with your sound?
Yes, well, in the case of what UTP is currently doing with industry, what we are trying to do is to establish further access for students to our university, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Certainly, the challenge that we have right now is many industry are pulling back in terms of human capital investments, in terms of scholarships, because of the current pandemic. But what we've also found is that there are some bright spots of industries. For example, the glove industry, for example, has done very well. The online industry has certainly done very well. We just had a good discussion with, say, one of our IT accounting consultancy agencies, which I won't mention the name, who is looking forward to sponsoring more of new students into the university. So I think in that area, honest discussions between us. I'm sorry, can you all hear me? Because it seems as if the video is frozen.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Sorry. Yeah. So what we found is that certainly for certain selected areas or certain selected industries that are actually doing well, they are even more enthusiastic to send students in to the university. I think one of the key things that we have to do with the industry is they need a certain set of skills. And the question for us in university is, how do we train the graduates to have those skill sets while still fulfilling the traditional curricular requirements that in most universities, in most countries, is regulated by an accreditation body or an accreditation agency or certain government entity. And I think that's the challenge that we're faced right now, because there are only so many hours in a day for the student. And given the current pandemic, those hours are even less available for actual education.
I think
so
that was in one of the key words you used. Traditional.
Yeah.
And indeed, as Keith Johnson has mentioned in the chat here, maybe we need to look to more modular course types. And of course, lifelong learning, stackable qualifications coming, right, Francisco?
An interesting case is what I was able to observe in India. In India, they decided to cut the curriculum 20%. And that doesn't mean that they sacrifice 20% of the curriculum. That means that they allow to have students to learn on their own, certify their knowledge, and then do other things that are related to their own journey, their own personalized experience. If you compare a typical bachelor's degree in Latin America in comparison to the US, we have about more or less 30% more credit hours, seat hours of students in order to have exactly the same degree. And of course, we are teaching for degrees that many of them are for professions that no longer will be needed in the future.
Yeah.
So
Obsolete.
I think flexibility is the key. Otherwise, we are out of business, because now universities are not the only players in town.
Absolutely. All right, that brings us to the closing comments. So closing comments, please. What world do we want to create with digital technologies in higher education? Hyoshin, I'll go to you first, then I'll go to Paulo, Aidit, and then Francisco. So Hyoshin, what world can you see us creating in higher education? And put your sound on, please.
I mean, COVID-19 makes us think about the future quite soon, because we actually expanded what kind of world, especially in terms of the higher education, we would have it. But certainly without any proper preparation, we just faced the current situation. But I do believe that since we have experienced kind of a mock future education, so I strongly believe that we would have as we have talked about the community, like a learning community, both on-site and off-site. So like a hybrid environment. So this is what we have been experiencing with the COVID-19, and then we are ready to prepare for the future in a hybrid situation. And that's what I want to see. And that's what I can see now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Paulo?
Well, my belief is that we have a major responsibility here, because technology is also very dangerous. All the misinformation, we can use technology and not even think, and just waste time looking at it, I don't know, without thinking. Our responsibility, I believe, is helping people first learning how to think. Please think, then have opinions and so on. And as I mentioned, emotions are part of this process, because it's not only thinking, but evolving. We should instill in people the tools that allow them to handle their learning, meaning wanting to learn, learning to learn. Because I cannot agree more with Francisco, things will evolve, and maybe what I've learned is not useful anymore. So I need to learn something new, but who is going to help me I have to socially be able to get there and be emotionally prepared to accept that challenge. So that's our responsibility, to influence people on the right track so that they use technology in the right way, whatever that means. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, over to Aidid. Aidid, put on your audio. Give us your final comments.
Yes, I think this pandemic, there's a silver lining behind this pandemic. Because I think what we found is that at one stage, I think there was a general feeling that as the younger generation move on, as we move on in the world, we'll be more, how can we say, digitalized. There will be less interaction. More things can be done at home. We could work from home and all of the associated benefits that occur to that. I think what the pandemic has done, whereby we are forced to be apart, is that we felt the need to become closer. And I think that's a great essence, at least for Unit Technology Petronas, where we believe in the residential college, where to really have education as an experience. We have this well-rounded student model that we believe in. So I think what we found is that the further that we've moved apart, facilitated by technology, we felt a yearn and a need to actually be closer. So, and I think that's a great thing as far as bringing education forward and the philosophy of us imparting our personal experiences in close proximity to the students. So that's what I say. And I think after this pandemic is over, we will cherish that opportunity and that unique experience even more.
Thank you, Aidid. And the last word to Francisco.
Thank you, Maria. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation from the Council to participate on this. It has been a wonderful, fascinating experience to learn from the colleague panelists and also from the audience. Secondly, I will add, similar to what Paulo was indicating, to the list of expanded C's that he or she had indicated, I will add one, which is curiosity. Yes. Curiosity is what students need to continue learning for the rest of their lives. Otherwise, again, obsolescence is going to be the problem. It's going to be an issue. So, the crisis is telling us, COVID is telling us that, as you were mentioning before, Maria, this is not an epidemiological problem. It is a problem which goes beyond that. Consequently, solutions will be more than epidemiologists, will be more than the vaccination. And for that, higher education is going to be more needed than ever. But a different higher education which is more responsive to changes. And then I will say, just to end, that I believe that the future is not something that you can guess by taking a look into a crystal ball, or that you can extrapolate with a mathematic model. The future is what you build. And I think that's what we need to do in higher education today. We need to rebuild, reimagine, rethink what higher education is at the end of the day for. And I think the ones who are able to respond to that question properly are the ones who will have a meaningful reason to exist in the higher education sector.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for our audience for taking this opportunity to join us as we think about the longer term goals that we want to achieve in higher education. I'm going to pass over to Roberto to close. Stay safe.
Maria, this was amazing. Thank you for this. You, Francisco, Aidid, Hirshin, Paulo, amazing. So I'm an engineer by training, and I was hearing what you all were saying. And what came to my mind there, sharing the chat, is how could we systematize the experiments? This has been done in business. This has been done in the startup world, and that was a game changer. So all of you talked about experimentation. So what are the frameworks that will come up? That's one idea. And the other idea, and thank you, Francisca, for highlighting that, is it's very in line with the spirit of this conversation series in the Gfcc. That's to reboot. It's to really need to create new things, and we need to build those new things. So thanks for sharing that. So just to finish, Maria, once again, amazing. And we have several of our university members, our corporate members who joined us for this conversation. For our university members, we will be interviewing all of our members in what we're calling Decoding the Now, trying to capture the learnings that are let's say, happening now in higher education, and especially those that have something to say about the future. So please stay tuned. We'll be in contact with you. For those who are not members of the Gfcc, we would love to hear from you. So please feel free to get in contact with us and to reach out to us. Again, Maria, thank you. Thank Professor Peter Smith, who is here for the partnership of the University of Southampton for us to do this. We will have another session coming up, right, Maria, that will focus not on education, but more on the research component. And we're very happy to be here, to have you here today. Before I go, a final comment. Next week, on November the 17th and the 18th, we're having the GFCC Global Innovation Summit. This was mostly about digital, but I have an analog thing to show to you that is our URL. So please go to gis2020.thegfcc and register. We have full days. We're talking crossing the chasm, health, innovation, and the future economy. Join us there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Good night, Hyoshin. Sleep
Bye-bye.
well.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.